Hello, for this last part of the lecture, we're going to cover cost justification. As you're likely aware, you know that if you want to make changes, if you want to implement controls, if you want to improve the job, improve the task, you usually have to cost justify it to show that you'll get a return on your investments. The method I'm going to show you has been proposed by one of the consulting companies, Advanced Ergonomics. In their method, they propose using a sampling of costs to include labor, how much does it cost to do the job, injury, and so this would be injuries that you might have had or potential injuries that might occur. Could also consider, this is probably questionable, could consider whether there's a potential for an OSHA citation, OSHA fine. And then the cost of the change which you're proposing, which may include equipment costs, training costs, and such. So on one side you have costs, and then on the other side you'll have benefits, as in if you receive this benefit, then you anticipate having a savings for it. And you might see things such as a reduced potential for injury. It might take less manpower to get the same task done. You could have improvements in efficiency and productivity and quality, decreases in the waste that is produced. You might have improved morale, and so you'd be looking to try to put dollar costs or dollar savings on those. It's simplest to work through an example, and so I have an example where you did an ergonomic assessment, such as you've done on some of your weekly applications, but we performed an assessment on a manual material handling task, in which the task requires 2 employees to palletize 50-pound bags from a conveyor. You know that the 50 pounds is within NIOSH's a maximum limit of 51 pounds, but still 50 is a fairly heavy load. Currently the task is performed 2 hours per day, 5 days a week, and the employees are paid $10 an hour. You've had an injury, so there has been an injury, and so you've done, as part of your investigation, you've done an assessment that showed that the job did exceed the NIOSH lifting guidelines. It exceeded their recommended weight limit, so you want to head off, prevent any future injuries, so you recommend installing a pneumatic manipulator to try to reduce the physical demand of the job. The manipulator costs $12,000, and then there's a $300 annual service cost, and if you added that or put that in the first year, it might be installation and servicing for the first 12 months. If you install this, though, you'll be reducing manpower down to just 1 worker needing to operate it. You estimate that you're not going to guarantee there won't be any injuries because, well, people are still physically involved in the job, or you'll have this one person involved, so you're not eliminating injuries, but you are reducing the potential for it. And so you suggest that the manipulator will decrease injury potential by 33%. And it comes down to, well, how do you convince your boss to buy a $12,000 pneumatic manipulator to prevent any future injuries? And so we're going to try to show that and base it on a 1-year time frame. We always want to try to recover our costs early, and so if we can recoup our costs in a year, wonderful. Sometimes we'll do a 3-year analysis. It's easiest to work through this type of problem by laying out, what you know, what you need, what you have, and then find it. And so I'd suggest you run through this using a cost-benefit table, such as I have on screen. The cost-benefit table is going to walk you through looking at some of these costs I've mentioned and anticipated savings for the present job. So as the job is currently done, how much is it costing in labor, injury if you've had that, potential OSHA citation, equipment, and so on. So we'll compare the present job to the proposed job, compare those to look at any anticipated savings to try to come up with a total savings in the first year. And so we're going to try to come up with estimates for each of these boxes. Starting out with probably the easiest is you have 2 employees doing this task currently, and so our labor cost is just simply the time times the wages. So we have 2 employees. They're on this particular task 2 hours per day. Assume we do it 5 days per week. I think I had that in the problem. 5 days per week. You do it every week of the year. There's 52 weeks in a year. 52 weeks in a year. Even if they go on vacation, you'll have to have somebody filling in for them to continue with the job. And then they're earning a salary of $10 per hour. Multiplying those together, once you have that laid out, the cost for labor annually for this particular 2 hour per day task is $10,400. You could, if you so desire, know that benefits beyond the basic salary, the benefits are typically 20 to 35% of wages. And so if you wanted to add into, for example, if I did 20%, 20% of my $10,400 is an additional $2,080. And so I would come up with a total labor cost for the current job of $12,480. And so you could always do that if you want to. I'm not going to consider that. I'm going to just stick with the strictly $10,400 just to keep it easy. Injury cost. Say we've had a back injury this year, and if you don't make changes, you think that we'll have another back injury and costs will be similar. And so for this one back injury we've had this year, the worker incurred 1 month of lost work days. And then we also found out, looking at our insurance data, that the direct medical cost was $30,000. And so this is the injury we've had. Any future probably could be similar. So we're going to go ahead and base that on the similarity. And so looking at lost work days, so your lost days, he was out a month. And so that's going to cost us at a $10 per hour. Even though the task is only 2 hours per day, he is a full-time worker, this injury, and so we're out this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then if it's a month, 4 weeks per month. That'll be $1,600. And then plus we have the direct medical cost of $30,000, and so our total injury cost is equal to the $30,000 plus the $1,600 will be $31,600 for our injury costs currently. OSHA citation, this you can either take or leave. This is purely if I'm going to go ahead and add it in as a sample to show you a sample. If this were considered a willful violation, since you've had an injury, you've evaluated the job, you know the job places an excessive demand on an employee, you know that injury potential is still present, and if you don't make changes, and so the hazard condition exists, if you do nothing, then potentially you could have a $50,000 to $70,000 citation. If I say I'm not going to guesstimate that much, I'm just going to plug in something that might be a little bit more reasonable through negotiation and so on, you agree to fix the problem, maybe they whittle it down to, for example, $20,000 or $7,000 or whatever you deem to be likely reasonable. I'm just going to estimate this, purely guesstimate, as $20,000 to give us something to work with. So if I don't make changes, then OSHA could come in, look at it, there could be a complaint, they could issue a citation for $20,000. Cost of proposed change. If you want to implement controls, then you're going to have a purchase cost of $12,000 for the manipulator. And then if it's a $300 either maintenance or installation for this first year, however you want to call that, then it will be $12,300 for the proposed change. You could add in, if you wanted to try to track down this information, you could add in training costs. And so as the employee that's on the job, as he's learning to use the manipulator, you have to have some costs associated with it. You'd have for training, you'd also have costs associated with lost productivity. The job is not being done up to par, up to speed in the first few days as he learns how to use this equipment. And so you could add in additional costs if you want to. On the cost of proposed change, of course, any big piece of equipment will be expensive, but OSHA estimates that the average ergonomic change is only $250. And so this needn't be a big cost. Anticipated savings, what are you going to get out of it? Well, one thing is you've got reduced manpower, and so instead of requiring 2 operators, now you're down to 1 operator, and so we're just simply having the cost of the wages, and so now it's $5,200 instead of being $10,400. We also estimated in the problem that you'd see a 33% reduction in potential injury. So 33% decrease in the injury potential, meaning you're saving 33% of the injury costs. So your savings, and again, these are anticipated savings, not guaranteed, but you think you'll reduce injury costs by 33%, so multiply 0.33 by 31,600, the injury cost. That'll give you $10,428 in savings. Okay, so still there's injury potential, it is just reduced. And then finally, once you run those calculations, now let's just plug it into the appropriate boxes, and then you'll be adding and subtracting to fill in the leftover boxes. And so starting out, present job, the cost of labor is $10,400. Since you have cutting manpower, you're cutting 1 employee, half of that is $5,200. Which means the proposed job is still at $5,200 for labor. Your injury cost, present job, based on the back injury we had, is $31,600. We said would have reduced the injury potential by 33%, so we're saving 33%, so we're saving that what we calculated at $10,428. Which means we still have, instead if we reduced it by 33%, the injury potential by 33%, we still have 67% injury potential. And so the cost of that will be our $31,600 minus our savings, $10,428, is equal to, for the proposed job, there's still a chance we'll be paying $21,172 for injury. And again, you don't promise no injuries, but you do reduce the potential for it. OSHA citation, I said if you don't change the job, there's things wrong with it. We know there's things wrong with it. We're still exposing our workers to increased hazard, so we could have a citation. Proposed job, if we make changes, it should be $0 if we fix, and so we should be saving $20,000 by implementing the manipulator. Equipment, present job is $0. We don't have the manipulator. If we buy it on the proposed job is $12,300, which means it'll save us a negative $12,300. Now we simply tally up the totals in each column for the present job, adding $10,400 plus $31,600 plus $20,000 is $6,200. Proposed job should cost us $38,672, which means we should be saving. You can either add this column, remembering to keep the negative, or you could subtract within the row, but you'll be saving overall $23,328. Okay, so this manipulator should pay for itself. It should save us $23,000 this year. Okay, so it would be a good thing to do. You will be saving if you install it. Now, if you say that the OSHA citation is just completely ridiculous to even consider, if that won't fly, then go ahead and remove it, take it out of the problem, don't even consider it. That means you should still be saving $3,328. And so still the manipulator should pay for itself within that first year. Okay. If you need to extend this out for several years, if it doesn't quite pay for itself in the first year, you can run a next year. We won't have to buy it, so we'll remove $12,000 in cost. So we'll have even more savings the second year. Okay, so where do some of these numbers, one of these values come from? You're like, she just pulled them out of thin air, and that's true, but you want to base it on something substantial. You want to base it on research or base it on previous experience. And so under our anticipated savings, you can get your estimates from company experience. The value for the dollar value for our injury cost, I pulled that from our last injury. And so you can do that. If you, for example, start a stretch and flex program at one facility, one site, and you see a 27% reduction in MSDs, then you could project, well, if I started at another site, if they're similar, if I had a similar experience, I could see another 27% reduced injuries. Or if you want to be more conservative, say I would have at least a 10 to 15% injury reduction. Okay, so you always want to go on the conservative side. So you can use your company's experience. You can use ergonomic safety research, which will be my next slide. You can use sales literature, and I would say use sales literature with caution. But some of the sales literature will have tested this. They've run studies. They've either paid for studies or had independent researchers run some studies. But for example, this Ergotron multi-monitor says that it will increase productivity by 20%. So if you install it, you'll see more productivity. This body-built chair said that if you use their chairs, you'll have an 8% increase in productivity. Okay, so anticipated savings you can get from these sources. If you went with the ergonomic safety research, then you could have, for example, decreased injuries. Stover Snook, the Liberty Mutual researcher who had access to Liberty Mutual's workers' comp data, he said that if you can design manual material handling injuries to accommodate 75% of the population, so what we did with the Liberty Mutual table out of the textbook in the psychophysical area, then we'll see a decrease by 2/3 in injuries. So if you can design the job so that most people feel that they're okay for their body, then you'll see a decrease in injuries. Okay, so I used a 1/3 rather than 2/3 in my problem. Again, just trying to give a conservative estimate. I don't want to promise the moon. I'm being conservative. Same thing for upper extremity MSDs when they've looked at force and repetition, making those acceptable for people. There is a psychophysical method to look at upper extremity MSDs. A researcher predicted that we'd see an 80% decrease in MSDs if we could make those two factors acceptable. You can also go find information on costs of injuries, for example, carpal tunnel syndrome. One case, the direct medical costs, if there's no surgery, costs $12,000. If it's with surgery, if it's with surgery, $35,000, so more than 3 times, or about 3 times as much. On average, CTS case is $18,000. That's just purely medical. If you add a direct cost, if you add an indirect, they're estimated 2 to 4 times the direct cost. And so a single case might cost your company $175,000. Back injury, $9,000 on average, but those cases can exceed $100,000 very easily. There was even a case in the literature, if you listen to U2 like their music, Bono had, as they were starting out on one of their summer tours during rehearsals, he suffered a back injury. They had to cancel their tour, give back ticket money, and so on. But an insurance broker incurred a bill of over $17 million for that single back injury. Anticipated savings continue, and this is just pulling more information out of literature, out of various studies. Feel free to find your own, or make note as you're reading your professional safety or your synergist. Just kind of keep track or make note of some of these factors. But you can look at decrease in injuries. You can look at increases in productivity. You can also look at what if you don't have any injury, you don't have a direct medical or indirect medical costs. Can you still use this method? And I would say yes, you can. Although injury has been a primary driver for modifications, there are many jobs that you don't have their recordables. And so you're like, can we still justify ergonomics? And I would say yes, you can. One thing you could pull over is turnover and absenteeism costs. There was an article that it pays to be nice to your employees. It was listing the costs of if you have to replace an employee, such as a customer service rep, a fast food chain manager, an HR manager. These are the costs that it would take to replace a single employee. Okay, so very expensive, often beyond even their salary for a year. But in this method, you'd be looking at, can you define costs? And so if you don't have an injury, but you have people that are absent a lot, don't show up because they're home recovering from soreness or from an injury, or if you can't keep people in a job because it isn't ergonomically bad, it's not worth what you're paying them. It's not worth the bodily aches and pains. Then even if you don't have the injury that you've paid for, you have definable costs such as acquisition. How do you get a new employee? And this will take a lot more legwork to try to track down, but you'd have things to acquire an employee. You'd have job advertising. You might have agency or headhunter fees. You have interview fees if you're traveling to interview them or you're bringing them to you. You have testing fees, your psychological personality types of tests, your drug tests. You have all that paperwork associated with hiring a new employee. You might have a sign-up bonus. You might have moving fees. Okay, so you've got acquisition costs. So once you've hired them, then you have development costs. And so what do you put into a new employee? You'd have orientation costs, you'd have training costs, you'd have loss in productivity while they're learning the job. Okay, so you have just the cost purely to develop a person. And again, it's how do you find those, track those down, guesstimate, estimate those if you don't have them already. Is the difficulty. And then separation, before you hire your new employees, you're separating your old one, and so you have things such as loss in productivity before they leave. They know they're leaving, and so the last 2 weeks they kind of slack off a little bit. They might have severance pay. You have an exit interview and associated paperwork. You might have, I don't know, stealing or even damage. As they're leaving, they take the stapler, they take extra paper, they take something from the workplace, and so some of your products disappear. Or disgruntled workers, they might damage, destroy things that you've got to replace. Okay. So you have these potential costs even if you don't have an injury. So this is concluding the week 7 lectures. This is my last lecture I'll have recorded. For this homework assignment, I did want to note that you do have strain index, the hand activity TLV, a cost-benefit analysis, and then I also have you reading parts of chapter 3 and 4 to give you a little bit more solid foundation on ergonomics. I do have particular pages picked out of that, and so as you're doing the homework, make sure that you focus on the pages that are identified so that you don't feel like you have to read the whole chapters. Okay. With that, I conclude this lecture.